Okay, good evening, everyone. We are pleased to call to order our Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023. And we will start by having our land acknowledgement read by Councillor Baines, please.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. Before even the Ice Age 10,000 years ago, the First Nations walked upon, cared for the lands we now call home: Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others, including the Petun around Osler Bluffs, who cared for their families and communities the way we now seek to care for ours. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and respects all of the nation-to-nation agreements that have formed relationships with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. The reality of our shared history, the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community, and seeks to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better, to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the adoption of the agenda, and that the content of the Committee of the Whole agenda for September 25, 2023 be adopted as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Vice Chair Doherty, Councillor Perry. Are there any changes or questions with respect to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Just as a question for other business and timing, do we have any other business that people wish to bring up under other business from council? Deputy Mayor? Yep. Okay.
Thank you. I do believe I will in regards to a request for ongoing updates in regards to the water plant. I think that needs to go through a proper motion.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. We're just doing it for timing purposes. We know that the procurement training will be probably 20 minutes or so. So we're just timing up everything. All right, so declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations for this meeting? Seeing none, don't hesitate to bring it to my attention if something comes to your attention. And then number 4, we have no pre-registered deputations. So that gets us right to the meat of the matter with staff reports. And we'll turn it over to Treasurer Quinlan for T 2023-20 acceptance of surety bonds for development agreement related securities. Treasurer Quinlan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick summary on this report. We're bringing this forward because today the town currently only accepts letters of credit or cash for securities for development agreements. Accepting only LCs or cash as securities was brought forward by one of our local developers originally as a barrier to development since it restricts capital and they're secured. Additionally, since that time, the province's Housing Affordability Task Force, which we just reviewed in council, advocates quite strongly for municipalities to accept surety bonds through their published list of recommendations. We have taken a look and gotten some opinions from our legal reps with reference to the policy and the template that is attached. Our legal opinion was that it was very much in favor of the town and that it reduced any risk associated with surety bonds in the past. In the past, surety bonds were very much looked at as insurance rather than a security, in the sense that the organization, which would be the town, would have to prove their right to receive any funds should the development agreement not be finished or the certain portions of the agreement not be complete. That has since changed quite significantly. I think the surety bond providers had understood that this was, sort of a risk to municipalities and have updated their own offerings to help decrease that risk, I guess. Our policy does include a demand that says the template or the actual surety bond must pay to the town under our own consideration within 10 days when we request and do that, or say that the amounts are due when a development does not finish. So we feel like the information that we've included is quite strong. And again, we did receive that legal opinion. We also reached out to a few other municipalities. In fact, drafted the policy and the template according to some of the bigger city, we use the city of Welland in this case for the most part, and did have some discussions with them to understand if they got any pushback from the development community specific to the regulations that we've put into the policy, and they have not. We did also provide a copy to the developer that had originally requested it, and he too passed it along to his legal team and as well as his surety bond provider, and they agreed that it was acceptable and that they could provide a product that would fit within our requirements. So mostly what we're asking is that council support this updated policy so that we do sort of reduce the barriers with respect to development, largely because when LCs are received or cash are received, that it restricts the capital for developers. And we did hear that quite a bit when we speak to the development community. And I think that's about it, but happy to hear any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Is there anyone in the gallery wishing to speak to 5.1? Seeing none, just ask the clerk to confirm there's no one wishing to participate or ask questions virtually.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. There is no one participating remotely.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll read in the motion that staff report T 2023-20, acceptance of surety bonds for development agreement related securities be received, and that the development agreement surety bond policy and accompanied development agreement surety bond template substantially in the form attached as Appendix A be adopted, and that council delegate changes to the development agreement surety bond policy with notice to council when changes are made. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mayor Hamlin, Councillor Ring. Any questions through to the treasurer? Mayor Hamlin. And then Councillor Baines.
Yeah, I have two. The first one is, it notes in the report there's an Appendix A, which is the template for the development agreement surety bond, but I don't see it. And I'm just wondering if it could be attached when this comes to the council meeting following. Okay.
My apologies. I didn't notice that it hadn't been attached, but yes, of course, we can attach it and circulate it as well.
Okay, thank you. My second question is, letters of credit have traditionally been used because before they can be issued by the bank issuing it, the person who wants it, the developer, has to actually have the exact amount of cash representing the letter of credit in that bank. So if the bank has to pay or make good on the letter of credit, it's fully funded. So my question is, I'm not familiar at all with surety bonds, and I'm just, do we have the same guarantee that if we call on the issuer of the bond, that they will make good on it as if it was an LC? Thank you.
If I may, through the chair to Mayor Hamlin. So yes, you're correct that in the past, the LCs were sort of the only format that said, you know, when we required the cash, we would receive the cash. And it's correct that developers had to put up that full amount. So if it was a $3 million security, the $3 million was actually, you know, semi-deposited with the bank. In the case of surety bonds, essentially it's an insurance policy. It would work in the same way as an insurance policy for the developer in that they would provide a payment to the surety bond carrier. And within our template, and I apologize that the template's not included in the actual report. In our template, what we include as the demand is that, and what the surety providers would be approving or following is that we as the town will will deem when we feel that the current agreement was not fulfilled, and that they have 10 days to pay us the amount that we request. So it's very clear. In the past, that wasn't the way surety bonds worked. But if they subscribe to that policy, they are assuming that risk that they shall pay when we say they haven't followed the agreement. So it's much cleaner than it was maybe 10 years ago.
And I just have a follow-up then, Madam Chair. So who is it, insurance companies then that are issuing these, or who are we looking to make good on these payments?
If I may, generally, yes, it is an insurance company that would issue it. But I'm sure, and I don't know the market very well, but I'm sure that there are other financial institutions that carry this type of policy.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey, and Treasurer Thurman.
Sorry, it's sort of a follow-up of the same sort of question. Whether it was a letter of credit or more particularly a surety bond, if for whatever reason the town wanted to, I suppose it's collect on it for what they perceive to be a failing of the developer. Is there an appeal process by either the bond company itself or the developer? And if so, how does that work? If they object to our having implemented to collect on the surety bond.
If I may, Madam
yes.
Chair, through you to Councillor Baines. So there isn't really a appeal process. When the surety bond provider would issue this policy, it states it would go on our template that states when we say, or when we deem as the town that this agreement has not been satisfied, that they shall pay. There really isn't sort of an appeal process to that, since it is very clear in the documentation that we would provide to them, and they have to sign and approve that. We wouldn't stray from the template. In general, I suppose if there was a legal opinion that we could or should in some way, we may bring that back to council at some point. But the template is very clear that should the town feel, and just the exact wording is, wherever the principal, which would be the developer, shall be declared in writing by the obligee, which is us, to be in default under the agreement, and the obligee intends to make a claim under the bond. The obligee, which is us, shall notify the principal and the surety in writing of such default in the form of a demand. And in the form of the demand, it says that it shall be payable within 10 days.
Wow. Well, perhaps if the developer or the bond holder did disagree, you could refer it to our new AMP process. Thank you.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, any other questions? I'm not seeing any cards, so I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. And now we're at departmental updates, and very pleased to welcome Fire Chief Thurman to talk about the Fire Communication Services Agreement.
My first time in this chair in a few years, so it's a little different. I've been moved down a little bit. First, I just want to say I'm not here for a fire truck, so you can all breathe, okay? Every time you see me come up, it's whew, so it's all good. Really, I'm just doing a quick update with my intent on signing an agreement with our dispatching services with Barrie Fire again. Ends at the end of this year. It's a 5-year term. We started in 2009 with them. A little update with Barrie. They started the dispatching back in 1984. They dispatched for 21 departments, 8,000 residents over 5 regions. When we kind of took a look to see if they're still requiring, or they have what we require, they're completely certified and NFPA 1061 skills and knowledge. I mean, they're all certified dispatchers. They're complying with NFPA 1221, which is call handling times, how fast they can get the call out to us, which makes life or death. They're fire dedicated dispatching, meaning they don't dispatch for police or EMS. And then they got a full live backup center. So they're building, they're getting bigger. They have minimum staffing. I just found out, just as I'm sitting here, they will be compliant with the new generation 911 system, which is national. And on top of that, I'm not quite sure what this means, but they are also going to be compliant with NENA I3, which is cybersecurity. So they're going to be compliant that way. So that's another side relief on that end. I've also got a little note too, is that Markham Fire used to have dispatching system. They've discontinued. They've gone with Barry. Barry has hired their experienced dispatchers, so they're even in a better position. And they provide excellent service since 2009, and I'm 100% confident about our agreement going forward.
Excellent.
Yeah. And if I could plug one more thing.
Sure.
Okay. Next week is Fire Prevention Week.
Yes.
Okay. So if everybody can check their smoke alarms, please. And our prevention team will be around. We'll be doing fire drills. So just be aware of that.
Oh, excellent. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone on council have questions for the fire chief? No. Councillor Baines?
Sorry.
Through the chair, then to the fire chief, sort of a geek question, if you will. If I'm in Collingwood and I push 911 because I have a fire, that is, I'm assuming I tell the operator fire, so that gets switched to Barry's fire station to deal with the fire request, or?
That's correct. It goes to North Bay 911.
Wow.
North Bay takes your call, goes to Barry. Barry sends it to us, depending on the call. If it's a medical, for instance, it will go to George and CAC, which is the paramedics. That goes to Barry Fire, then gets dispatched out to us.
So why do so many services then, as a follow-up, seem to arrive at an incident, i.e. police, fire, EMS, and who's making that call?
It depends on the level of service. I'm going to let's do a medical, for instance. We are under what we call a level B service. So we don't go to every call. We go to the important ones. We don't go to shortness of breath. So if it's someone that was having a heart attack, then EMS ourselves would be dispatched. Police would naturally be dispatched. If it was a vital signs absent, the police have to go to that. So sometimes you do see duplications of services, but we all have our place in it, in each call.
Thank you. No further questions.
Sure. CEO Skinner?
I just wanted to add one small thing through the chair to Councillor Baines. That's one of the things that most people don't ask about when they say, for example, are deciding to live in Collingwood or maybe on the other side of a line. There are things that council sets as the levels of service, for example, for fire service and for paramedic backups, this level B that we have. So when you live here and there's a call here, what type of backup services will occur? So it's an important thing for the public to know, and also for council to know the types of directions that have been set up in the municipality. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much, Fire Chief Thurman, for the update. And then we will move on. We have no reports or minutes of other committees, and that takes us to the consent agenda. That the general consent agenda be here and received, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. And 8.1 is September 2023 NVCA board highlights. And we'll have a motion to receive. Sorry, please, Councillor Baines and Councillor Perry. Thank you. And I'll ask Councillor Baines as our NVCA rep.
Yes.
I'll just receive them first, and then I'll ask you to speak to it after. Okay. So all those in favor? That's unanimously carried. All right.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. I'd just like to make one comment in regard to the NVCA board and a motion that you may or may not have seen there, but my friend, Councillor Belanger from Wasaga Beach, proposed to the NVCA that we actually increase the levy, if you will, to all municipalities, a total of $400,000 for the NVCA budget, $200,000 of which to hire more staff, particularly in their planning department, because as I can attest in concerns I'd had expressed by residents of Collingwood, it was taking an awful long time to get a response from their planners in regard to applications, even for residents in our town. Sorry, so
carry on.
I was just saying how I think it was an appropriate response.
Okay, sorry, I didn't even see the CEO's hand up yet. I was waiting for you to finish before I start jumping around to other people.
Just my last comment. I think it was an appropriate response to an issue that had developed for the board. Thank you.
Thank you for reporting that. And any motion that was passed at NVCA would come through their budget proposal for us for approval. Correct? Okay. CEO Skinner.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm sorry if my hand movement caused any disturbance. Through you to Councillor Baines, or really in response to his comment, because of some provincial changes recently with the regulations, NVCA no longer generally provides planning support for the town. So within their regulatory department, and with respect to the work that they're doing to help us with flooding, shoreline erosion, steep slopes, I would have support for additional resources. We certainly would like to see some faster turnarounds. But on the planning front, I think that may be not quite the right ask. So maybe at a future meeting, we want to clarify, maybe at a future NVCA board meeting, which resources the levy increase pertains to, with respect to which supports are intended for the member municipalities like us. And thank you very much.
Okay, Treasurer Quinlan. Yeah.
Sorry, I think Councillor Baines wanted to clarify something, but I was just actually sending out a copy of the NVCA budget when you started to talk. So it was very. One thing I will share too is it's a 15% increase for us this year, which means about $45,000 over what we had previously paid to the NVCA. Last year was a 4.5% increase. So, just for your consideration, that in fact, maybe we would like to have them come forward with a deputation or some other staff report to discuss it, because I think it's definitely above the percentages that we have included in our own budget. So just as a thought too.
Okay.
Point taken. I will relay that to the CAO. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan, and thank you, Councillor Baines. All right. So now we are at other business. I think in Top Gun, they say we're burning or something, aren't we? We're moving through. So I'm going to call on our manager, Trueman. He's going to deliver some Procurement 101 for us this evening.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just waiting for the slideshow to come up for everybody. So thanks for inviting me to speak this evening. I'm just going to go over public procurement, just kind of general training and best practices, and providing you all with a little bit more information about what my team and I do. So next slide, please. So why is public procurement process important? So during our process, we are looking to ensure that we are safeguarding public funds, acting efficiently and effective. We're building public confidence. We're building supplier confidence. We try and mitigate legal risks, and we increase competition through bid opportunities. The Municipal Act establishes requirements for municipality to adopt and maintain policies with respect to its procurement of goods and services. Next slide. So the role of procurement staff is to consolidate and leverage the town's procurement volume, source goods, services, and prepare, issue bid documents and bid analysis, provide procurement support for staff, provide procurement training and advice, provide support with contract administration and legal challenges. We're also continually working to improve our procurement processes. And through risk management, we do collect things like bid performance sureties, WSIB certificates, insurance as well. We also work to promote social and sustainable procurement, and we improve vendor relationships and assist with performance disputes from time to time. And procurement-related crisis management, that's usually done through things like emergency purchases. And then we also work through cooperative procurement, municipal with partners, the municipal level, provincial, and federal procurement opportunities as well. So I wanted to provide a list of what impacts our oversight and how we do our day-to-day work. So these are some of the things that kind of dictate how we can and can't operate. So that's things like the Municipal Act, the procurement policy. So that's the bylaw in the case of the town of Collingwood, administrative law, common law, statutory law, the broader public sector procurement directive, the Competition Act, the Discriminatory Business Practices Act, along with trade agreements. There are several that we are impacted by, but the main one here that we deal with the most frequently is the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. And then there's also municipal best practices, which are, and just some examples that establish some of the best practices we use are the Bellamy Report and the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry. Next slide, please. So in terms of what all of those things mean and how they do impact, like directly impact what we do on a day-to-day basis, is things like notices of procurement and the content. So for example, we must make our documents free of charge. Where bids are published. So we publish all of our bids online. How submitted bids are handled. Time periods for publication of opportunities. Supplier pre-qualification process requirements. The minimum information that can be contained in a bid document to ensure bidders are informed fairly. Rules around changes to published bid documents through things like addendums. And when non-standard purchasing is allowed. Next slide, please. So the Town of Collingwood has a procurement bylaw, and the goals and objectives of the town's procurement operations are to obtain the best value for the town when procuring goods and services and construction, to encourage competitive procurement and ensure the principles of fairness, objectivity, transparency, and accountability are reflected in the town's procurement processes, to support effective business planning such that goods, services, and construction will only be acquired after consideration of need, alternatives, timing, and appropriate life cycle management issues, to adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct and to avoid conflicts between the interests of the town and those of the town's employees, officers, and elected officials, to ensure compliance with all applicable trade agreements, laws, and regulations, to practice reciprocal reciprocal non-discrimination and geographically neutral with respect to Ontario's trading partners and avoid preferential treatment of local suppliers, to ensure the procurement of goods, services, and construction with due regard to the preservation of our natural environment and the promotion of human rights and fair labor practices, to avoid creating situations of relationships with may result in a continuous reliance on a particular supplier, to align town's procurement with the existing sustainable practices, initiatives, and plans, thereby advancing a culture at the town that recognizes and places a priority on economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability. Next slide, please. So this simple graphic just shows the very basic steps that all procurement projects should follow. Again, there's a quick note there. This is obviously after a budget's been passed and also after procurement's done, usually our annual plan. So we know generally when we're trying to kick off each project. Even though all the little columns are the same size, that doesn't represent how much time they take. There's generally, longer periods when we are drafting, when we're going out in the bid period, and evaluation usually does take quite a long time. But just generally speaking, we kick off with initiation from the project team. That's usually when the department's ready to start considering it. They usually come with their broad project needs and also their approved budget. That's also when we select the procurement type and the method. There'll be more on that on a later slide. And then we move into drafting the bid or solicitation documents. That's where we finalize the deliverables, the scope, the evaluation criteria. All of that is established during that time. And then bidding period, that's always prescribed depending on the assumed value. And by that I mean that's how long it will be out in the market for people to consider and submit a bid. But during this step, we manage the online bidding portal. We also assist in answering any questions or from potential bidders. We also do site visits, which are optional or mandatory depending on the project. Not every single project requires a site visit, but that's usually when we manage that process as well. After the bidding is closed comes compliance and evaluation. The procurement staff, we do compliance on every single bid project that comes in. And if it is something like a request for proposal, it's going to require in-depth evaluation. That's when we get the project team and the evaluators together and we run an evaluation consensus meeting. And then we get into award recommendation, and then we also allow for debriefs to any unsuccessful bidders. And then the contract is awarding and staff can begin to work with the supplier to deliver the goods, services, or to begin construction. Next slide, please. So procurement methods. This is where some of the different terms and definitions come in. This is what we use here in Collingwood. Sometimes they could be described using slightly different words, but generally speaking, this is pretty uniform throughout. So an open market method, which is posted online for all potential bidders to consider. In Collingwood, all projects valued at over $50,000 will follow this method. An invitational, which is a minimum of 3 suppliers are invited directly to bid on a project. Projects valued between $7,500 and $50,000 will follow this method. And then we also have non-standard and emergency purchases. And that's used when a competitive process cannot be used due to acceptable criteria established by the procurement bylaw. And also, you may recall, I come to council once a year and I give an update on all non-standard and emergency purchases that occurred the previous year. So there's that report back feature. Next slide, please. And then procurement types. So this is where we get into the different acronyms that my team uses constantly. So this is where we have things like request for quotes, or an RFQ is used when we know exactly the goods or services that are required and we only want to know the price. The lowest compliant bid is selected. We also have requests for proposals, or RFP. This is used when we have a general idea of what we need for a specific project, but we do not have the exact specifications. Bidders are asked to submit their vision based on the deliverables and also their price. RFPs are evaluated and scores are assigned. The highest awarded score is selected. Price is always a part of this as well, but is only one part of it. The technical requirement is also where the other points are assigned. The town of Collingwood has established rosters, which is a list of qualified suppliers established through an open competitive process. The town utilizes rosters for specific projects on an as-needed basis. For example, our engineering services has a fairly full-service roster set up where we go to them with specific projects to have certain and we know, we have the confidence to know that they are qualified to do the work in accordance with what we established in our documents. And then an invite to tender, or an ITT. This is used most commonly for construction or highly engineered projects. The technical requirements and designs are provided and prices are submitted. The lowest compliant price is selected. Next slide, please. And then we have a couple other request for types. Sometimes you'll hear just called an RFX, which is, the X can be filled in for everything else. So that's a request for information. This is just literally where we go out to the market and we're trying to, where we don't know enough to even really ask the right questions to get appropriate proposals or prices back. And so we are asking for submissions back, just containing information. Request for expression of interest. That's where we want to know how many people might want to bid on a project like this or submit on a project like this. It's usually a simple yes or no. We don't ask for a tremendous amount of information back at that time because we should be well on our way to establishing what that criteria looks like. And then request for pre-qualifications. And this is used to narrow down the field to ensure that the eventual RFX is only only issued to bidders who can meet the requirements. This is most commonly used in construction, but we have seen pre-qualifications used in other areas as well. Next slide, please. And then the last one that the town of Collingwood uses is group buys or cooperative purchases. We participate in several different group purchasing programs. The purpose of this is to work along with other public sector or broader public sector agencies to effectively and efficiently navigate certain purchases while obtaining competitive value using the collective purchasing power of the group. Procurement reviews the processes of all the agencies and the work on a specific project if required to confirm that our purchasing requirements are met for the opportunity we are considering. So that just means we will look into how they went out to the market, what they gathered, what they received back. Is it similar to what we're using? Some of the groups that we are part of are the Georgian Bay Area Public Purchasing Collective, the Ontario Education Collaborative Marketplace, Canoe Procurement, the Canadian Collaborative Procurement Initiative, the Government of Ontario's Vendor of Record, Kinetic GPO, and Sourcewell. The decision to use a group buy comes down to decisions between the project team and purchasing. Sometimes there are things that are available through these that 100% meet our needs, and we do have enough information to know that we are obtaining, reflective good value for money. But there also could be a specific nuance to Collingwood that means that when we're doing our investigation into the group buy, it doesn't really fit our needs. And so it makes more sense for us to go out into open market or go into an invite to craft our own document in that particular case. And there are also plenty of services that aren't really part of any group buy, like, for example, construction services. It's very rare to find that because it's always so hyper designed and customizable. So next slide, please. And so the role of council, as a result of the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry and in alignment with public purchasing best practices, there is a clear separation of political and administrative functions in procurement. Council's main role is to approve the procurement policy. Like I said before, we have a bylaw, and to establish the annual budget. Council may vote to receive updates to require their approval to award on projects of interest. This is typically a project that is expected to have a high dollar value, involve significant risk, security concerns, or significant community interest. Next slide. And I also wanted to touch on the buy local or local preference purchasing, because that's something that we do receive a lot of questions about. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are bound by multiple trade agreements and regulatory requirements that do not always make it possible to buy local. For example, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement has established threshold that dictate when a project requires an open market competition. So, for example, for goods and services, anything that we think is going to cost $121,000 and $200,000 or more requires going out to open market. And if it's a construction project that is estimated to be valued at higher than $302,900,000, it is the same. In Ontario, we also have the Ontario Discriminatory Business Practices Act that states geographical location cannot be a factor in accepting or rejecting business. The town's own procurement bylaw, as I stated in an earlier slide, we have an established threshold of anything over $50,000 requires to go out to open market. We also do believe it's important to approach this subject with caution. If all municipalities implemented these preferences, it would seriously limit the number of opportunities local businesses here in Collingwood could compete for outside of our community. Next slide, please. And finally, I just want to touch on the Fairness Monitor. We employ an independent Fairness Monitor who is a third party whose role is to observe all or part of a procurement process, to provide related feedback on fairness issues to the project team and the purchasing team, and to provide an unbiased and impartial opinion on the fairness of the observed procurement process. We've been working with the Fairness Monitor for about 2.5 years now, and yeah, we definitely have gone to them with very complex and maybe stranger issues that maybe myself or my staff haven't seen before, or if a department head or a project team has some specific questions, and yeah, sought their input on several different projects, and it's been a really great opportunity in my opinion. The next one's just the thank you slide.
All right, excellent. A lot of information. Pretty concise. Thank you so much for that. Do we have any questions from council members with respect to something you need to maybe digest and think about? Mayor Hamlin?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for that report. So if the purchased price is less than $50,000, what is the process that we go through in purchasing those goods?
Yeah, thank you. Manager Trueman?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mayor Hamlin. So if something is, let's say, in accordance with our bylaw, if it's under $7,500, that's a low-cost procurement. That is something that the department can research. They can gather prices. We always tell them to go out and try and find the best value for what it is you're looking for. But there doesn't need to be a form of a competition for anything from $1 to $7,500. Anything that's $7,500 to $50,000, that would be what we deem an invitational level. So therefore, we would still work with project teams to determine, do you want to just know prices? And then a request for quote would be issued to 3 different potential suppliers. And they would give them a deadline, receive everything back, make sure that it meets the compliance that they're looking for, and then we would go ahead and award. If they want to do proposal, like I was explaining before, if you know kind of generally what we're looking for, but maybe don't have the entire picture, that would be request for proposals would be developed. And so again, we could invite up to a minimum of 3. We do invite more depending on the project. And again, we would go through a mini evaluation when those come back.
Or follow up.
Sure.
So sometimes I hear that the department heads are deciding on who is a successful supplier of whatever's at issue. So are these all when the amounts are under $7,500?
Andrew
To you.
Trueman?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Mayor Hamlin. So there is between the 7,500 and the 50,000, there's actually another level. There is 7,500 to 25,000, which is a department-led initiative, which generally means the department can kind of develop the requirements within the department. They can gather the information, and at that level, it would be whoever had the delegated financial authority, depending on the value of the product, would be able to make that determination. Anything above 25,000 and under 50,000, that's still an invitational. But again, we're working through the process more with the purchasing team. And I also did see that the CAO Skinner indicated that they'd like to speak.
CEO?
I just wanted to add a little piece of clarity that to that piece. Even though the accountability lists lies with those two levels, whether it's more or less than 25,000 that Manager Trueman was mentioning, the award is still based on the low price and or the overall highest points that came out of the procurement process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? None? I just Manager Trueman, just with respect to delegated authorities that impact the procurement process, is there just simply the departmental one for that up to 25,000?
Sorry, the delegated financial authorities, that's sorry, I'm just trying to think the best way to answer that. Based on what we have right now, the actual authority to commit the town to a contract, that depends on, the employee and what's been established for them. Department heads over their departmental budgets as it stands right now, they do have the ability to, after going through a procurement process, which is to say, we've evaluated, we've assigned scores, we've had an award recommendation. They do have the ability to then, sign the agreements within that fall within their departmental budgets. But again, they have to go through the entire process, which is to say they have to go out to, if it's over $50,000, they have to go to open market. We have to go through the entire process of collecting everything and evaluating based on whatever it is that we decided will be part of the evaluation criteria. Does that sort of help?
Yeah, it does. I think most of the other delegated authority situations I'm thinking of occur after the procurement has been done and the project is in flight, and that would be a different discussion. So great. All right, thank you. So seeing no other questions then, that brings us to our public delegation section of the agenda. And do we have anyone? Mr. McGarry, come on forward. Welcome.
Chair and members.
Hope you'll indulge me with a few minutes of your time at this late hour on the 2024 budget process. Understand it was not technically on today's agenda, but it was in the last committee of the whole meeting, and there was not any opportunity to comment at that time. And I promise I'll take less than 5 minutes. I spoke to council in January 2023 when you were then the newly sworn in council, and it was late in the budgetary process. I pointed out at that time that Collingwood had much higher property tax rates than other neighboring jurisdictions. But because you were newly sworn in, I didn't really expect that you would be able to make significant changes to the 2023 budget, as the process was already well advanced and no action, to my knowledge, was taken on that issue. However, you're now a more experienced council, and we are earlier in the process. So I'd respectfully submit that you now have the opportunity and indeed the duty to look into this issue more carefully. Here's the problem. For 2022, the median Collingwood home was assessed at $327,000. The municipal property tax on that home was $2,349. And Wasaga Beach, a home with the same assessed value, would pay $1,941 in tax, or $408 less than Collingwood. That is, the Collingwood residents' property tax bill is 21% higher than the equivalent Wasaga Beach residents. I have not repeated the calculation for 2023, but I have no expectation that things are very different now. So either we are overtaxed in Collingwood or Wasaga is undertaxed. On the face of it, Collingwood doesn't seem to have markedly different services or amenities compared to Wasaga. Have we seen the new impressive rec facility going in Wasaga? Pretty nice. Their impact assessments shouldn't be so very different. Our population numbers are relatively close. I think our population growth numbers are somewhat similar. So therefore, revenue growth from DCs and growth in assessment should be roughly similar. I suspect that Collingwood probably has more commercial and industrial tax revenue as compared to Wasaga Beach, which should mean that Collingwood would have a lower dependency on the residential component of the taxation. So how do we explain or understand this big difference? It looks to me as if the biggest difference in the two towns is in the number of full-time equivalent employees, FTEs, and purchase services. A chart in the 2023 budget draft appeared to show that Collingwood's FTEs and purchase service total is 36.3 million. Wasaga's was 26 million. We are 40% higher. And we have been growing these expense categories at a much faster rate than Wasaga Beach. So it sure looks like the biggest contributor to Collingwood's higher taxation rate is that we have significantly higher staffing levels, i.e. having more FTEs and purchase services. If I'm right, I would submit that this provides good reason for council to commission a study on this issue before we get too deeply committed on the 2024 budget. Personally, I would like to see council undertake a deep dive into our higher residential tax rates, and in particular to study the comparative head counts and purchase services as compared to neighboring jurisdictions. I submit that such a study, preferably by outside consultants, would be a worthwhile investment. I believe it could reveal significant cost savings as a result of inefficiency or lack of productivity in the Collingwood situation. And if you elect not to do that, I beg you to at least challenge the projected budget with a more intensive, zero-based approach to see if there is spending on programs or services where the cost is not justified or the value is not there. Simply nibbling with across-the-board percentage cuts, I don't feel is the best way to go. So 3 questions. 1, is the level of service and amenities provided in the two towns different enough to justify this degree of difference in the taxation? Question 2, is Collingwood receiving an appropriate return on investment from our higher taxation and higher headcount? Question 3, is there a case to be made for reining in Collingwood's rate of growth in FTEs or possibly even reducing headcount? I would thank you for future consideration of this matter, and I'll email my comments to you today for more in-depth look, and happy to entertain question or follow-up.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGarry. Treasurer Quinlan, would you have any kind of an initial response, except that you look forward to receiving the comments for our process?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think as part of the 2023 budget, we did explain quite lengthily, I suppose, about the differences between the two towns. I would beg to differ that there are some different services. I happen to be a resident of Wasaga Beach as well, so I do know what services are available there. I suppose that, one of the main things that we had highlighted during budget time was the fact that they are recipients of the OMPF and have been able to put that money away over the years and really beef up their asset management from that standpoint. So there's some significant dollars that are associated with this. And I, to be honest, I don't know off the top of my head, but certainly happy to get the comments and again, provide as much information as we can.
I do remember when you said that the other municipalities, Wasaga in particular, was receiving over $1 million in the OMPF. And I never did hear a reason why we don't qualify. And if I might suggest, that's another question we could address to our MPP.
Sure.
So if I may, Madam Chair, so we did actually ask to bring this forward at AMO as well, and staff have reached out. But the long story short of why we don't receive the OMPF is because of the local density. It's about density numbers, and our density numbers are, I think, if I can recall correctly, almost 4 times what our neighboring municipalities are seeing. So we don't have the rural sprawl that the other municipalities have in our area. And that was truly the number one reason why we don't receive OMPF. We did apply, I believe, at AMO to try and request a meeting with the minister to see if we could appeal to, in fact, getting some funding for some other gaps we felt might be relevant in the OMPF, but we're denied that.
Thank you. Okay. And I do think, that we still need a study on the head count and the FTEs, which are very, very different between the two towns. If I may, Madam Chair, one other little point.
Yes, sir.
This setup on the, the committee of the whole following the council meeting, I thought was supposed to facilitate easier public comment and the input, but it's not really, as you can see. I mean, it's not a problem for me. I'm a political geek and I have no other life anyway, but I was quite happy to sit here through the afternoon and enjoy the proceedings. Right? But it really is not conducive to public input because we don't know when your council meeting stops and we don't know when the committee of the whole starts and we don't know when the opportunity for public discussion will come along. So to me, it's not working.
Right. Well, we do appreciate that input. I do know that, contrary to maybe what it may appear this evening, we have enjoyed and experienced great participation at public meetings and some very specific files. So I know they can find us if they truly want to. And typically our remote has been fairly well received as well. But we do appreciate your input as to the convenience. And I know that we try to stick to a timeline in terms of 5 o'clock for deputations that are registered, not the 5-minute ones at the end. So we do stick to that timeline for public planning meetings and for pre-registered deputations. But we're working on it, and we do appreciate you coming to tell us where you think we're maybe not hitting the mark.
And thank you for indulging me today.
Yeah.
Thank
okay.
You.
Take care. Bye. All right. So now I jumped ahead and I skipped the poor deputy mayor who had another business. So we're going to go back to other business.
And just briefly, John was already approaching the podium and I was not going to get him to walk back.
No, I knew as soon as I even had an asterisk beside.
So I just wanted to quickly say, we had the matter on council agenda today, but I didn't think it was appropriate to add any other aspects to it. It was just that motion that we needed to handle. And it was, as I mentioned earlier, it's fully understandable that the motion needed to be handled directly rather than go through committee first. But going forward, I wanted to just have a clear understanding on how further reporting to the public and council is expected to be undertaken. So a question for CAO Skinner, if I may. As we're working with a very short time frame with the November 10th timeline, would you expect that every committee of the whole agenda would have an update item on it?
Yes, I would think that given the accelerated, say, 5 weeks that we have left till a decision, that there would likely be an update. Now, the major information, which would be the main advice to council, will be coming forward in a larger report, but each week there 2 weeks for committee of the whole. I think that would be reasonable. Yes.
Okay. And so just to follow up, because I was just trying to determine there whether or not I thought any direction. I don't think it's necessary for the public sessions, but the other area that I wanted to accept was about the discussions during the open sessions. And a reason for that is I've got a few questions about the current New Tecumseh and Town of Blue Mountain agreements. But I'm not sure really what can be brought before without perhaps first being reviewed and in camera. I know much of the pertinent data about things is in the public realm, And I want us to be as transparent as possible. But I recognize when we get into the agreements, we're getting into that protection of business operations, and there is a requirement for some discussion in a closed format. So again, through yourself, Chair, to CAO Skinner, will you expect that I think there's a couple of in-camera sessions planned. Will there be opportunity to ask some questions there?
CAO Skinner?
Thank you through the chair. I haven't looked at the dates of the upcoming items. Certainly any council member can request that an item be discussed in camera. And if we weren't sure if it needed to be in camera, we could have that conversation quickly offline and make sure that we're putting it in the right place with as much an open session as we can. And I have no concerns with that. I do think that depending on what happens in the next little while, certainly we would like to see the town of the Blue Mountains sign on with an ongoing agreement. That would be ideal, and in which case there may be some items related to that negotiation that would be appropriate in camera.
Mm-hmm. And just another follow-up on that, and that is a particular area because we do have the current agreement with them, and it's not really the kind of agreement that we would expect to have on a new plant going forward, and there's terms within the current agreement that we may need to have discussion about as too. So I appreciate that. If we can provide some input by email, and that could determine whether it goes in or out, that's helpful. It's just I knew with the next 5 weeks it's going to be very, very difficult to get through it, and I was just trying to make sure I was following the proper process, and it makes total sense to get some information in a written form in an email, because then it's something that can be dealt with when the CAO has an opportunity to get to it. So that's great. I don't believe I need to put anything forward. I'm comfortable with everything that we've said there. Okay,
that's great. And we can always run things past our clerk to make sure if we require the in-camera or not. So she will be able to advise us on that. So my other question that does bring to mind then is in terms of are we simply going to be continuing to bypass committee of the whole and putting these matters into council, or will there be things going forward that should come to committee of the whole rather than bypassing it all the time? Because it is a format in which we have more opportunity and relaxed policy for our interaction here, and or would there be an opportunity to have it at committee of the whole and plan for a council meeting following if it's something that needed to be expedited? And that would just be my question. Are we just going to continually bypass committee of the whole? And that would be CEO.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to refer this over to the clerk very shortly. Typically, we try not to bypass the committee of the whole from a staff perspective unless there's something that has already received public input, and we're just bringing it back for council to see. In this case, it was something that was quite pressing, but our intentions are not to bypass committee of the whole where at all possible, and certainly not out of line with the procurement bylaw. The clerk is very much our champion on this and making sure that things happen properly. So that's why I teeter up to potentially make a comment on your question.
Thank you. Clerk Amos?
Certainly, I think too, the reference was the decision that was made by council today pertaining to the water treatment plant. And I agree. We try to put the items on the committee of the whole agenda where we know that the public may want to provide a comment, knowing that generally departmental updates, it doesn't go back to the public, but always knowing that at the end of the meeting, we have it open should anybody be watching, want to participate in that section.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. All right. So if there's no other, Mayor Hamlin.
Yes, for you, Madam Chair, I have a question for Director Robinson. Many of us are anxiously awaiting moving forward on some affordable housing initiatives, which for us means housing people who work in Collingwood. And I know that the Affordable Housing Task Force has been busy. I know the planning staff's been busy, and I know we engaged our housing consultant again. And I'm just wondering when we will see something come back to this council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Valentine.
Thank you so much. And through you, Chair. The extensive public consultation on the Affordable Housing Master Plan Strategic Options Report that you'll recall did wrap up at the end of August. So our consultants, NVLC, with advice from the Housing Task Force and staff have been working hard on producing a final draft, and that is tracking to be delivered at the special meeting of Council on October 30th. And that will also include an accompanying staff report, which will highlight any items that we feel should be advanced to the 2024 budget.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So any other business? Seeing none, then I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Vice Chair, no, so somebody put up your card. Vice Chair Doherty. I thought you're all those in favor. That's carried unanimously. Thank you.